Now, I was the cowboy singer at a dude ranch in the San Ynez Valley for about 9 years, and I figure I did around 1,500 performances. But my favorite event was the breakfast ride. And we put about 70, 75 people on horseback and 100, 200 in what we called hay wagons. They were truck trailer combinations. And we'd take them up about 4 miles behind the ranch and to an outdoor kitchen, and we'd feed them breakfast. And while they were eating, I'd sing to them. When the breakfast was over, a few of them would drift up my way, and we'd talk about old vintage cowboy songs. And some of them would go up to the cook and ask for the recipe for the flapjacks. Now, they were real good flapjacks, but I figure if you make them, cook them, and eat them outside, they're going to be better anyway. But the cook would always tell them the same thing. He'd always say, "It's a secret. You can't have it." And they'd walk away disappointed. Now, I figured I could fix that. So one day after the breakfast ride, I called up a friend of mine who was a cowboy historian, and I went over to see him. And well, we went through some of his old cowboy books, and we came up with a flapjack recipe. And he says, now that we have the recipe, what are you going to do with it? I said, well, I'm going to put it on 3x5 cards and keep it in my back pocket. And when I hear somebody ask for the recipe, well, at least a person that's been to the ranch before, an old time visitor, a guest. Well, then I'm going to give him the recipe. And he says, you know what's going to happen? I said, no. Well, you're going to get your butt fired. I said, well, you're probably right. Yeah. Well, he says, why don't you write a song called Flapjack Recipe? I said, well, that, would be all right. I guess it'd be 2 or 3 minutes long. It wouldn't be very interesting. And I said, I tell you what I'll do, though. I'll write a poem, and I'll put the recipe at the end of the poem, and then everybody'd have to listen to the whole poem before they got to the recipe. So the name of the poem is Flapjack Recipe. It's another clever title, and it goes like this. Well, this time it would be a short cattle drive, but it would take most of a week. We were moving the herd up to summer pasture. Grass was good up on Cow Creek, and well, I could use a change of scenery, change of faces too, I thought. Them bunkhouse walls was a closing in. Cabin fever's what I'd got. Now, our new cook would be a going too, so's we could test him for the big trail. I hoped pork and beans weren't his best dish, and his coffee weren't too pale. He said we should call him Stumpy. He was a little feller, and he looked like he'd been there and back again. And I guess you could say that Grumpy was the best mood he was in. Now, Stumpy brought his own chuck wagon. It looked like it'd been through a war, probably had. This and that held it together. Pieces he said he codged from the prairie floor. Said he never had to buy a thing, just picked up stuff left sitting by the road, wagon parts, pots and pans and such, and not one thing been stole. Well, maybe one. Yeah. Well, that first night, we set the herd to grazing while Stumpy lit the fires. Grub was ready in about 2 shakes. Now, here was a cook we could admire. The food, well, it was hot and it was plentiful, just what a cowhand needs. And it tasted right like restaurant grub. We thought this here Stumpy, he aimed to please, but, well, we was wrong on that account. Although his chow was good, he told us we was just plain worthless. Twice he did that, twice. But I thought I'd understood. I guess that Stumpy was a cowboy once, and he wished he was one still. Even I had wondered where I'd be when I was over that old hill. Now, don't say nothing. Don't say nothing. Well, I had to guard the herd that night. And when the owl had finished hooting, I caught a couple hours of rest, and then the breakfast bell was tooting, and it was bacon, beans, and flapjacks. And the coffee, well, the coffee was hot and thick, at least as good as supper was. But the flapjacks was my pick. Now, I've been on the cattle drive for going on 10, 15 years. Probably had a million flapjacks, but nothing that was near as good and light. And they had a kind of special flavor. I said out loud, these here is something every cowpoke should savor. Then I had me an idea. Well, it happens now and then. If I could get that recipe, write her down, then I could begin to selling it to them city folk. Oh, they'd buy it sure enough. If it come from way out west, they'd buy most any kind of stuff. But first, I had to separate our cook from his recipe, and he just weren't the generous and giving type. So I guessed, well, I'd have to sneak. And I like sneaking too, don't you? I really do. So that night, see, Stumpy, he turned in early, as most cookies often will. He slept there neath his wagon, so I waited just until he started a snoring like a old half-dead sick bullfrog. Just like that. You've heard that, haven't you? Yeah. And I thought, now, here's my chance. So I got down and started crawling through the Jimson. But when I stopped to take a glance at Stumpy, you know what? He was glancing back. Seems he was putting on the snoring in like some ornery diamondback that he struck, and there I was, staring down the barrel of his gun, and I remember then thinking, this don't look like any fun. No. Well, look, I only cried a little. Just don't let that get around, all right? I tried lying. I think I prayed I might, and then I heard the sound a pistol makes right before it aims to shoot. Well, and that weren't just perspiration. That was filling up my boot. No, it weren't. Now, I figured I had one last chance to stay above the ground, so I croaks out, Stumpy! Stumpy! You know you makes us the bestest flapjacks of anyone around. Well, that was all it took. I lived to eat another day just like a fish that spit the hook and got away. And Stumpy, he weren't near as bad as we made him out to be. Close, but not near. Yeah. He listened to my whole idea before he shook his head at me. He said, you know, I know my jacks is tasty, about the best there ever was, but I think you're being just a mite hasty, and the reason is because, it's because the recipe ain't written down. It's just made up on the spot. There ain't no special ingredients. I just throws in everything I got. Guess my bowl is special, though. It was given me by my pa. He worked the gold rush up in Alaska where the sourdough is law. And he said, never, ever wash this bowl. Said the leavings in there is what they call the starter. And always add a shot of whiskey. Now, there's a point of contention here, though. And he either said always add a shot of whiskey or have a shot of whiskey. It sounds a lot alike, you know. So I do both just to be sure. And then in no particular order, a couple pounds of flour, some soda, some water, some sugar, salt, and eggs can help, but only if you got her. A handful of oats, if a horse will give them up. And then the secret ingredient, tobacco juice. Yeah. What? Look, I only adds a cup and a half. It's for color. 2 at the most. And you stirs it with a big wooden spoon, and you lets them rest a day. I sets them on the wagon seat. It keeps the flies away. Sometimes a little trail dust leaks in, but there's no helping that. And when it's time to cook them up, well, I used last week's good, lumpy pork fat. Then you fries them till the edges burn, and you hangs them up to dry. Oh, you'll never make them like I do, no matter how you try. So there you go, old Stumpy said. The flapjacks of your dreams. Tobacco juice is what I replied. So tell me, Stumpy, you got the recipe for them beans?